You have met the enemy before, though you might not have known it. Perhaps it came wearing the face of a friend, or a lover, or a stranger who stirred something sharp inside you. It may have spoken words that lingered like smoke, or simply looked at you in a way that made your chest tighten. Each time, you felt a faint recognition, as if the soul were whispering that this is the one you must meet. There is something ancient about that recognition. It feels older than the story of your life, older than the mask you wear in the mirror. It moves beneath the surface of your days, silent and watchful, waiting for the moment when you are ready to see it. Until then, it finds its way through others, through conflict, rejection, disappointment, and betrayal. The faces change, but the pattern remains. You call it bad luck or fate or karma. Yet, deep down, you suspect it has a purpose. You begin to notice how it follows you. The same emotion, dressed in new names. The same wound, hidden behind different eyes. Every attempt to escape leads you closer to it, as if your resistance were the very rope pulling you back to its center. You try to silence it with reason, with distance, with understanding. But it returns, patient, precise, merciless in its devotion to your awakening. And then you wonder why the soul would do this. Why it would weave enemies into the tapestry of your becoming. Why love must disguise itself as opposition. These questions do not come from the mind. They rise from the hollow of your being. From that quiet ache that asks to be seen. You feel the pull to turn inward, to look beyond the surface of who hurt you and into the deeper mirror of why it was needed. The truth is that the enemy is not sent to destroy you. It is sent to reveal you. It arrives when the self has forgotten its depths, when you have mistaken peace for comfort and comfort for truth. The soul, unwilling to let you sleep forever, calls forth the one force strong enough to break your illusion. Sometimes that force wears the name of another person. Sometimes it takes the form of your own reflection. You can feel the tension between resistance and surrender building inside. Part of you wants to fight, to reclaim the narrative, to prove your goodness against what seems dark. But another part, older and quieter, knows that there is something sacred hidden in the conflict. It knows that every enemy carries a piece of your unclaimed light. And so, you stand at the edge of this recognition, caught between fear and curiosity. Somewhere within, the soul waits for you to ask, not how to defeat this, but what it shows you about yourself. That is where the journey begins. Once you start listening, the enemy stops being a threat, and then becomes the doorway. Every soul longs for wholeness, yet wholeness cannot be reached through comfort. It is born through friction, through the meeting of opposites within you. What you call your enemy is often the mirror of what you have buried, the reflection of a truth you were not yet ready to claim. The soul does not create the enemy out of cruelty. It does so out of love, because it knows you would never look into the fire willingly. Imagine your consciousness as a vast forest. Some paths are bright and well known, where your daily self walks with confidence. Others are darker, silent, and filled with shapes that vanish when you turn your gaze. These hidden places are not empty. They are inhabited by everything you have rejected. Every emotion, memory, and instinct you pushed away still breathes there, waiting to be acknowledged. When you meet your enemy, you meet a guide from that forest, carrying the face that your shadow chose to wear. At first, you resist. You tell yourself that this person or situation is unfair, that it should not have happened. You cling to your innocence, because it feels safer than seeing your complicity in the dance. But the unconscious does not speak through this logic. It speaks through reflection. What you despise in the other reveals what you have not yet forgiven in yourself. What provokes you is not their darkness, but the echo of your own shadow. This is the alchemy of the psyche. The enemy becomes the fire that transforms metal into gold. The heat of conflict dissolves the false shapes of identity until something purer begins to shine. Each time you allow yourself to feel what the enemy awakens, you descend one level deeper into your own truth. Anger becomes awareness. Fear becomes clarity. Resistance becomes the first spark of compassion. And yet, this process is not comfortable. It demands humility, the kind that bends the proud mind until it touches the ground. To see yourself in your adversary is to admit that good and evil are not separate realms, but intertwined roots of the same tree. Jung understood that the shadow is not an enemy to be conquered, but a bridge to the self. By facing what appears hostile, you begin to retrieve the lost fragments of your soul. When you reject the enemy, you reject your evolution. You delay your own unfolding. The energy that could have been transformed into wisdom turns instead into repetition. Life then sends you new mirrors, new enemies, and new flames, each one reflecting the same pattern in a different costume. Until at last, you stop asking why they appear and begin to ask what they are teaching you. In that moment, a subtle shift occurs. The forest is no longer a place of threat, but of revelation. The figures that once frightened you now seem familiar. You realize they were never separate from you. They were guardians of the gate you had forgotten, sent to lead you back to the center. And when you follow them inward, the fire that once burned you begins to illuminate your path home. This is the secret rhythm of transformation. The soul speaks through opposition. It sends the necessary friction to awaken the sleeping parts of you. It loves you enough to disturb your peace, to break the illusion that growth can happen in silence. For the soul, even pain is sacred because it opens what comfort closes. The enemy is the flame that burns the veil. When you see this clearly, the world begins to change. The people who once triggered you become mirrors of tenderness. The wounds that once ruled you become teachers of freedom. You start to feel a strange gratitude for the forces that once felt cruel, because you now understand their devotion. They were not there to harm you. They were there to bring you back to yourself. And so the soul creates the enemy, not to punish you, but to polish you. It creates darkness so that you may remember your light. It gives you opposition so that you may learn the true meaning of union. In the end, the enemy is not outside you at all. It is the part of you that loves you enough to break your heart open. There comes a time when life feels like it is circling around the same wound. You meet new faces, travel to new places, begin new chapters, and yet the pattern returns. The tone changes, but the melody stays the same. It feels as if the soul were orchestrating the same lesson through countless variations. You wonder why the same kind of betrayal, rejection, or misunderstanding keeps finding you. And beneath that question lies the deeper mystery of who is truly calling it forth. To the conscious mind, this repetition feels cruel. But the psyche speaks only one language, the language of symbols. Every time an old pain resurfaces, it is the unconscious knocking at your door, asking to be seen. It uses others as mirrors, because you cannot yet see that what you call fate is your own reflection projected outward. The enemy is the dream figure who appears in waking life, carrying the forgotten emotions that you buried to survive. In the language of the soul, nothing is random. Each encounter carries the vibration of what you still need to face. The anger you suppress, the envy you deny, the vulnerability you hide, all become voices that call you back into yourself. The enemy is not there to steal your peace, but to return what you abandoned. The shock of confrontation tears the veil between conscious and unconscious, forcing you to feel what you once escaped. Picture a mirror submerged in a dark river. You bend down to look and only see ripples of distortion. But when the water stills, your reflection becomes clear. The enemy is the stone that disturbs the surface, revealing what lies below. Each conflict hides a sacred geometry, a pattern of meaning guiding you back toward wholeness. You begin to realize that resistance does not protect you. It only prolongs the lesson. As this realization takes root, something softens inside. You stop asking why the world keeps hurting you, and begin to ask what within you keeps calling for this encounter. The enemy becomes less of a villain and more of a teacher. You sense an invisible intelligence, shaping each event with precision. Beneath every moment of tension lies the hand of your own evolution, guiding you toward the center that you once forgot. At first, you resist this knowledge. The ego clings to the comfort of blame, because blame feels easier than humility. It is simpler to call the other wrong than to admit your participation in the pattern. But the soul waits behind every resentment, whispering that your pain is not punishment. It is the sound of truth trying to rise through the silence. The human heart is vast, yet it fears its own depth. When someone touches a nerve inside you, it feels like intrusion. In truth, they have only found the door you locked from within. The enemy is not the one who wounded you, but the one who revealed where you were already wounded. What hurts most is not the event itself, but the sudden light shining on what you refused to feel. Imagine a temple buried beneath centuries of sand. Each conflict, each loss, each betrayal is a gust of wind removing another layer. Slowly, the sacred shape beneath begins to appear. The temple is your true nature. The wind is the enemy's gift. To the mind, it looks like destruction. To the soul, it is revelation. You begin to notice how the body mirrors the movement of the psyche. The chest tightens, the stomach contracts, the breath shortens. These are not signs of weakness, but messages from within, pointing to where life energy has been imprisoned. When you allow yourself to feel fully, without story or defense, that energy begins to flow again. The enemy becomes the key that turns in the lock of your breath. And then, in the stillness that follows, you understand that forgiveness is not about releasing the other. It is about freeing yourself from the illusion of separation. The one you called your adversary was the one who helped you remember your wholeness. Forgiveness becomes the moment when the mirror dissolves and you finally recognize your own reflection returning home. There is a strange tenderness that arises once you stop fighting the reflection. You begin to see that even pain has a kind of intelligence, that suffering can be an instrument of grace when understood. The enemy becomes less like a punishment and more like a sacred messenger. Its voice, once harsh, starts to sound like guidance in disguise. The same situation that once burned you now begins to shine with quiet meaning. The fire has not disappeared, but you have learned how to stand within it without being consumed. This is the work of integration. The soul seeks balance, not perfection. It does not wish to erase your shadow, but to weave it into light. Every emotion that once frightened you holds a seed of power. Anger becomes clarity when met with awareness. Fear becomes devotion when held in presence. Even jealousy carries the spark of longing, the reminder that you were born to create, rather than compare. The enemy is the vessel through which these hidden energies return to their rightful place. Think of the forest after a storm. The trees stand wounded, but the air is rich with renewal. The soil drinks the rain. The broken branches feed the roots. This is how the psyche heals. Chaos fertilizes consciousness. What was shattered becomes fertile ground for understanding. The enemy, by shaking the branches of your identity, allows the deeper roots of your being to breathe again. You notice how stillness begins to grow where judgment once lived. Instead of defending your wounds, you start to listen to them. The old stories that framed you as victim lose their weight. The world no longer appears divided between good and evil, between you and them. It becomes a mirror of forces in conversation. Each encounter reveals another polarity seeking union. And somewhere in that calm, the concept of enemy dissolves. You can feel the faint outline of love beneath every struggle. Not sentimental love, but a vast compassion that sees no separation between light and darkness. You begin to sense that the soul never saw an enemy at all. It saw only another path home, another reflection of itself, waiting to be remembered. Once this awareness enters your life, everything you encounter changes texture. Conflict no longer feels like failure. It becomes initiation. You sense the hidden rhythm behind events, the quiet symmetry that threads meaning through chaos. The soul speaks through repetition until you listen. When you do, the lesson softens. The external storms lose their violence because you no longer need them to wake you. There is humility in realizing that every adversary was invited by some part of you seeking growth. It does not mean you deserve cruelty, nor that pain is noble by itself. It means that your consciousness was asking for expansion, and life responded with precision. What you once called misfortune now appears as choreography. Each moment of resistance was a step in the dance toward self-knowledge. The psyche is an alchemist. It transforms conflict into consciousness. What once felt unbearable becomes luminous when held with understanding. The heat of anger refines the ore of identity until it yields the gold of awareness. The enemy's energy becomes your own power, reclaimed from the depths of projection. You do not win over them. You win yourself back from illusion. Visualize a fire burning in the center of a temple. Around it are the symbols of your life, every memory, every name, and every emotion that defined you. As you watch, the flames consume the false and illuminate the true. This is the inner purification the enemy brings. Through confrontation, the sacred fire is lit. It burns the veil of self-deception and reveals the face beneath all masks. When the fire quiets, you realize that nothing essential was lost. The identity that clung to fear fades, but the presence that remains is vast and unshakable. You feel a kind of peace that is not dependent on circumstances. The same people and events may surround you, but their hold has dissolved. The energy that once fueled conflict now fuels awareness. You have begun to remember who you really are. There is a moment when the soul no longer seeks to fix the world. It seeks to see it, to see clearly, without projection or blame. You begin to notice how perception shapes reality, how every encounter mirrors your internal landscape. The one you called an enemy becomes a sacred image of your own unconscious, asking to be embraced. What you feared in them reveals what you have not yet befriended in yourself. The mirror does not lie, it only waits for you to look without defense. This shift feels subtle at first, like a whisper behind thought. Then it deepens until your entire vision changes. You start to meet life with curiosity instead of control. Each situation becomes a message, each reaction a reflection. The old compulsion to divide dissolves. You begin to understand that darkness is not the opposite of light, but its depth. Without shadow, light has no form. Without opposition, love has no meaning. The forest returns as a symbol within you. Once it was dense and frightening, filled with unseen presences. Now it feels alive, breathing, almost intimate. You walk among its trees and recognize them as your own thoughts, your own memories. The figures that once chased you now walk beside you. The silence that once felt heavy now feels holy. You understand that the enemy never lived outside these woods. It lived in the corners of your unvisited heart. This realization does not make you untouchable. It makes you whole. You still feel sadness, anger, and confusion, but they no longer own you. They pass through like rain. You meet them with gentleness. You begin to treat every emotion as a guest, arriving at your inner temple. Even pain is welcomed because it brings its own wisdom. The heart expands with each visitation until resistance no longer finds a place to hide. And somewhere within that stillness, you begin to glimpse the self that Jung spoke of. Not a persona, not an ideal, but the living center that holds all opposites in balance. It watches your conflicts with quiet compassion. It knows that every shadow is a servant of light. From its perspective, there was never an enemy, only the necessary contrast through which consciousness learns to see itself. When this awareness settles into your being, life becomes a dialogue instead of a battlefield. You move through the world with the calm of one who no longer fears reflection. People continue to challenge you, situations still test you, but something fundamental has changed. You no longer respond from wound, but from witness. The enemy's power fades because there is nothing left to oppose. You start to sense a rhythm behind all things. Every interaction, every emotion, every coincidence feels like part of a greater choreography. Even loss begins to shimmer with a strange beauty, as if the soul were arranging these events to carve space for something larger. You realize that surrender is not defeat. It is alignment with the deeper current that carries all life toward integration. The river becomes your teacher now. It moves without argument, curving around obstacles, shaping them through patience. Its waters reflect both sunlight and shadow, yet remain untouched by either. To live like the river is to stop identifying with the waves of emotion and remember the depth beneath. The soul wants this for you, this stillness that holds movement, this clarity that contains all contradiction. At times you will forget. You will be pulled again into reaction, into stories of right and wrong. But even that forgetting is sacred. It allows the lesson to spiral deeper each time. Awareness expands, not in straight lines but in circles. Each return brings more humility, more understanding, more compassion for the human condition. You begin to love the very process that once exhausted you. And when you look into the eyes of what once terrified you, something miraculous happens. The reflection smiles. You recognize yourself in it completely. There is no longer you and the enemy, only two currents meeting in the same ocean. The struggle dissolves into silence. What remains is presence, simple and vast, watching the play of light and shadow with equal love. It begins as a quiet expansion inside you. The tension that once defined your existence starts to loosen, as if the walls of your identity are slowly breathing out. You notice how everything that once hurt you now feels like part of a larger pattern. The enemy was never meant to defeat you, only to awaken you. Its presence forged your understanding, stripped away your illusions, and returned you to the pulse of something eternal. You begin to see that the entire path, with all its friction and fire, was an act of mercy from the soul. The forest that once frightened you now glows with morning light. Shadows stretch softly over the ground, and where fear once stood, gratitude blooms. Each figure that opposed you now becomes a symbol of your own awakening. They were never truly against you. They were the guardians of thresholds, keeping the gates closed until you were ready to walk through them. The more you see this, the more humility fills your chest. You bow inwardly to the wisdom of life's design. You start to understand love in a different way. It is not sweetness or attachment, but a fierce, steady presence that includes everything. Love is the courage to hold contradiction without judgment. It is the river flowing through both light and shadow, through creation and destruction, without ever losing its source. When you look back at your enemies now, you see that same river in them, the same spark of divine longing wearing a different mask. Forgiveness deepens into something beyond emotion. It becomes perception. You no longer need to forgive because you no longer see separation. What was once offense becomes participation. The soul moves through both sides of every conflict, seeking to reconcile itself through experience. Even in the darkest moments, the current of unity continues to flow beneath the surface, shaping your awareness into a mirror of the infinite. And as this truth settles in, you feel the boundaries between self and world begin to blur. The pain, the joy, the struggle, the peace, they all move through the same open space within you. You are no longer just the one who feels, but also the space in which feeling happens. The soul, having led you through the labyrinth of opposition, brings you now to the center, where silence breathes, and everything simply is. In that stillness, the enemy dissolves completely. What remains is only presence, vast and unbroken. You sit quietly and realize that the journey was never about victory. It was about remembrance. Every enemy, every wound, every heartbreak was a mirror leading you back to your own depth. The soul does not create conflict for cruelty, but for awakening. It crafts the perfect mirrors for your evolution, each one reflecting what still waits to be loved. The faces that once triggered you now appear luminous, softened by understanding. You see the divine hand in all of it, even in what once felt unbearable. The world remains the same, yet your vision is transformed. The forest, the river, the temple, the fire, all symbols of your inner landscape, now feel like extensions of your breath. You no longer seek to escape your humanity. You inhabit it with reverence. The same forces that once tore you apart now flow through you as wisdom. You understand that light was never the absence of darkness, but its full acceptance. In this awareness, compassion becomes natural. You begin to meet others as mirrors, not as threats. Their anger does not shake you. Their fear does not infect you. You see their struggle as your own, reflected back. And instead of resisting, you listen. You hold space. You allow the dance of opposites to continue, but now you do so with grace. Conflict becomes dialogue. Wounds become openings. Silence becomes communion. When you close your eyes, you sense the presence that has always been guiding you. It feels like warmth, like home, like the quiet pulse beneath all movement. You no longer need to name it. You simply rest in it. The enemy was never outside you. It was the forgotten face of your own wholeness, calling you back to itself through every trial. And so you breathe deeply and slowly, feeling the rhythm of unity return. You realize that nothing was ever lost, only transformed. Every battle, every sorrow, every awakening was part of one unfolding love. The forest is still, the river flows, the fire glows softly at the heart of the temple. Everything is at peace, and in that peace the soul whispers very softly the words you had been waiting your whole life to hear. You were never divided at all.